Let's turn to one of the issues that do tend to dominate the agenda from time to time within the SADC summits. The matter of elections in this country to be specific. The Electoral Commission of South Africa, the IEC, has held a national briefing with organizations representing persons with disabilities ahead of the 2026 local government elections. The discussions focused on making the electoral process more accessible and inclusive, including addressing physical and digital barriers at the voting stations, strengthening civic education and improving voter registration tools. IEC's General Manager for Civic and Democracy Education, Research and Knowledge Management, Moagisi Letlhaku, joins us now to take that conversation forward. She's fast becoming a friend of the show. Good evening to you. It's good to see you, albeit on the other side, not in studio this time around. You've had a multi-sectoral national briefing with various organizations with a view towards breaking down these access barriers in the electoral process. Not many of us readily think about these electoral barriers unless you have to contend with them. So for context, let's start there. What barriers are these that we're talking about that you've identified over the various electoral cycles?
Thank you, Tulas, and good evening to you. I think the first important thing is to realize that us as the Electoral Commission, our mandate is to ensure that all South Africans have an enjoyable, but also are able to fulfill their right to vote independently and in secret. And what that means then is that you need to ensure that there are no barriers for any voter to be able to do so. And that's why for us, working together with the sector for persons with disabilities is very, very important because we need to ensure that they're able to fulfill this right and that it's catered for at every voting station.
So when we say then these barriers, do they have to do with the infrastructure? Do they have to do with the materials used in the voting process, or even materials that relate to political and civic education?
Yeah. So it's a number of things that could be barriers within the entire ecosystem. So both civic education, so accessing materials, whether it's content for civic education or our communication alerts, are they able to access it? And that pertains to language, that pertains to whether it can be read, for example, subtitles, that pertains to whether we use sign language and interpreters within our stakeholder events as we would have today, but also barriers on voting day itself. How are the venues accessible for persons with mobility disabilities? Are people with disabilities able to vote? Because you can imagine for a person who is visually impaired, they cannot see the ballot like me and you, Tulas. And therefore, you have to provide a tool that enables them to be able to exercise their vote. And what is that tool, Tulas? That tool is called the Universal Ballot Template, the UBT. And what it is, it's a voting aid where they're able to insert their ballot paper into this sleeve that has windows that align to it. What is on the UBT? There is Braille, so the windows are numbered in both Braille and large font numbering for those who are able to see a little bit, but they need it enlarged, and Braille for those who are able to utilize Braille reading, for example. And there are also various things on the UBT itself that make it quite special that enable a person who's visually impaired to know that they have aligned their ballot paper correctly. So there's a little slit at the top of this UBT where if you insert it in there and you can feel your ballot paper protrude out of that sleeve, you know that the windows on the ballot paper are aligned to the windows on the UBT.
So this UBT system, apologies, Moagisi, before we run out of time, this universal ballot template UBT system is a system we already have, and how efficient has it been in ensuring that those who are blind and visually impaired are able to exercise their right to vote?
It is a tool we've had for a number of elections already, a collaboration between ourselves and the sector for persons who are visually impaired. It was developed and it is available at voting stations. So we do provide it at every election, 2 UBTs per voting station. so that persons who are visually impaired or do not have a steady hand to mark their ballot correctly are able to
That
utilize
is
it.
fascinating. That's not something you readily see unless, of course, you need that facility for you to exercise your right. I'm just thinking about the other infrastructure at polling stations, because what you use as voting districts on days of registration, also on the day of voting, is not really an infrastructure that you own. What about access, physical access? How do you deal with those kinds of challenges? Or does it fall within the processes that take place in the days before elections? What differentiates between a voter for whom you will need to go to their place to assist them in voting and a voter that can come through? Because regardless of what the infrastructure looks like at the school, at the community hall, you should be able to cater for them.
Yes. So the majority of the facilities we utilize are, of course, not owned by the IEC, but they are public facilities. And in the main, Tulas, most of these public facilities are able to accommodate persons who need, to be able to use ramps, for instance, to access the venues. Of course, you do encounter here and there some facilities that do not have, and we're cognizant of those and do our best to ensure that we're able to put in place, even if it's temporary measures, to ensure that accessibility is afforded to those who need to be able to use ramps, etc., at those venues.
All right, thank you for coming through. That's Moagisi Letlhaku, who is General Manager for Civic and Democracy Education, Research and Knowledge Management at the Electoral Commission of South Africa, that is the IEC.